Two men broke into a house on a quiet Tuesday night. They weren't looking for a body. They were looking for a flat-screen TV, some cash, maybe jewelry, the usual. What they found instead sent them sprinting out the front door, straight into the arms of the responding officers, and cracked open a murder case that had been sitting in a cold case file for 7 years. The police hadn't solved it. The detectives hadn't solved it. The victim's own family had nearly given up. But two men who broke the law accidentally became the reason justice was finally served. Sit down, because this one is uncanny. Welcome back to Uncanny Crime Stories, the channel where truth doesn't just stranger than fiction, it body slams fiction into the floor and stands over it. I'm James, and if you are new here, this is the place where we dig into the cases that make you stop mid-scroll and say, asterisk, wait. That actually happened. Asterisk, yes, it did. For the ones who've been riding with me since day one, you already know what we do here. We don't do surface level. We go all the way down. So, let's talk about what happens when a crime accidentally solves another crime. Let's talk about a house in a sleepy neighborhood, a break-in that went completely off script, and a cold case that had been gathering dust in a detective's drawer since the victim's family still had hope. By the time tonight's story is over, you are going to have serious questions about whether justice is ever truly accidental. Let's build this from the beginning. Before we get to the burglars, we have to go back. Back to the case that was already broken. The one that nobody could crack. The one that the system had, for all practical purposes, quietly filed under Unsolved. Check back never. Her name was Linda Marsh. Linda was 34 years old. She lived alone in a mid-sized house on the edge of a neighborhood that used to be a good one. The kind of place where people still knew their neighbors' first names, where the mail carrier had been the same guy for 15 years. Linda worked nights at a distribution warehouse. She was quiet, reliable, the kind of person her coworkers described as asterisk, always there. Asterisk never called in sick, never caused drama, just showed up, did her work, went home. She had a daughter, 9 years old at the time, who lived primarily with Linda's mother about 40 minutes away. On the night of March 14th, Linda worked her shift, clocked out at 11:47 p.m. Her supervisor watched her walk to her car. He waved. She waved back. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Linda Marsh alive. The following Thursday, 6 days later, a neighbor called it in. Said Linda's car had been in the same spot all week. Said he'd seen her mail piling up through the slot in the door. He said there was a smell. Officers made entry. Linda was inside. She had been dead for several days. The cause of death, determined by the medical examiner, was blunt force trauma. She had been struck, more than once, with something the investigators described as asterisk, consistent with a heavy household object. Asterisk. The murder weapon was never found at the scene. The house showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to have been taken. Her phone was still on the kitchen counter. Her purse was still on the hook by the door. Her daughter's school photos were still lined up on the mantel. Here's what that tells a detective. Whoever killed Linda Marsh, she let them in. Or they had a key. And that single detail, no forced entry, is going to come back later in this story in a way that will make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The investigation ran for 8 months. Detectives interviewed neighbors, co-workers, the warehouse supervisor, Linda's mother, Linda's ex-boyfriend, a man named Dale Cutter who, I will say right now, always felt off to the detectives but could never be placed definitively at the scene. No DNA match, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, no witnesses. The case went cold in November of that same year. Linda's daughter was 10 by then. Her grandmother had stopped answering reporter calls. The detective who led the investigation, a man named Frank Okafor, said in one interview that it was the case that kept him up at night, that he still drove by Linda's old house sometimes, just because. 7 years passed. 7 winters. 7 Christmases without answers. 7 years of Linda's daughter growing up knowing that whoever did this to her mother was still somewhere out there. And then, two idiots decided to rob a house. I want to introduce you to our two accidental heroes. And I use the word heroes very loosely. Like, extremely loosely. Like I'm holding it with 2 fingers from 3 feet away. Leans forward slightly. Their names, for this video, we'll call them Marcus and Troy. 2 men in their late 20s. Not masterminds. Not career criminals running some sophisticated operation. These were 2 men who had made a series of increasingly poor decisions that led them to a quiet house on a quiet street on a Tuesday night, with a crowbar and the kind of confidence that only exists in people who have not fully thought through what they are doing. Their plan was simple: get in, grab whatever was valuable, get out, be home before midnight. Marcus had scouted the house earlier that week, said it looked empty. No car in the driveway, no lights, mail that hadn't been collected. Now, if you're thinking that sounds familiar, yes, you caught that. We'll come back to it. So on that Tuesday night, Marcus and Troy pried open a side window, climbed in, and that's when the plan, such as it was, completely fell apart. Because what Marcus saw when he turned his flashlight on in that back bedroom was not a flat-screen TV. The house they broke into was Linda Marsh's house. It had been sitting there for 7 years. After Linda's death, the property had passed through a brief legal process. Linda had no will, limited estate, and had eventually been taken over by a distant relative who lived out of state and had done almost nothing with it. No sale, no rental, just sitting. The utilities had been cut. The furniture was still inside. The curtains were still drawn. Anyone looking from the outside would have seen exactly what Marcus saw: an empty house, untouched. Easy target. But here's what Marcus and Troy didn't know, couldn't have known: that house had history. When Marcus's flashlight swept across that back bedroom, he saw things that stopped him cold. The room looked like it had been frozen in time. Personal items still in place. A woman's clothes still folded on a chair. And on the floor, partially obscured by the edge of the bed, something that Marcus would later describe to investigators as looking wrong. Like deeply wrong. Investigators believe what Marcus found was a section of flooring that had been disturbed and improperly replaced, likely in the aftermath of the original murder. A section that, over 7 years, had begun to show the physical signs of what was underneath it. I'm going to let your imagination do the rest of the work on that. This is not that kind of channel. What I will tell you is that Marcus ran. He ran so fast he left Troy still standing in the living room wondering what happened. Troy ran when Marcus grabbed him, and both of them ran straight out the front door, which they had unlocked from the inside, and directly into the path of a patrol officer who had responded to a neighbor's report of suspicious activity. Within the hour, the house was a crime scene again, and Detective Frank Okafor, 7 years retired, living 40 minutes away, got a phone call that night that made him sit straight up in bed. The officer who called him said 4 words. Frank, they found something. Optional. Sponsor read, deliver casually, break from the tension naturally. Before we get to what happened next, and trust me, what happened next is the part that changes everything, I need to take 60 seconds for the people who keep this channel running. Okay, back to the house. Back to what they found under that floor. Cold case cracks open, the evidence, the killer identified *. When the forensic team went back into Linda Marsh's house, properly this time, with full resources and 7 additional years of forensic technology at their disposal, they found what the original team had missed. The original investigation had been thorough, but it had been limited by what the technology of that time could extract from degraded evidence. 7 years later, forensic genealogy and advanced DNA profiling had changed the game entirely. Tools that hadn't existed or hadn't been accessible to local departments were now standard. The evidence recovered from beneath that floorboard, and I'll spare you the specifics, provided investigators with a biological sample. A sample that, run through updated databases, produced something the original detectives never had. A profile. And that profile matched. It matched Dale Cutter, the ex-boyfriend, the man who had always felt off to Detective Okafor, the man who had been interviewed twice in the original investigation and had answered every question calmly, confidently, with an alibi that was thin but technically unbreakable at the time. Dale Cutter, it turned out, had not been careful enough. Or rather, he had been careful enough for 2017. He was not careful enough for 2024. There was also this. When investigators re-examined the point of entry, or rather, the lack of forced entry, they went back to Linda's immediate circle with the new DNA profile in hand. A former neighbor confirmed something she had never thought to mention before, because no one had ever specifically asked. She had seen Dale Cutter at Linda's house approximately 2 weeks before the murder. She remembered because Linda had seemed tense afterward. She remembered Dale being handed back a key Linda had apparently asked for back. He'd had one made. He had already made a copy. The no forced entry detail that had haunted Detective Okafor for 7 years? Answered. Dale Cutter was arrested 14 months after the break-in that reopened everything. He was charged with first-degree murder. At trial, the DNA evidence was described by the prosecution as among the strongest they had presented in a decade. The neighbor's testimony filled the last gap. Cutter's original alibi, cobbled together from a friend's statement that held up in 2017, collapsed under cross-examination when that same friend, now estranged from Cutter, changed his account. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty. Quiet, measured tone. Linda Marsh's daughter, now 17 years old, sat in that courtroom. She had been 9 when her mother was killed. She had grown up with a hole where an answer should have been. She was there when the verdict was read. She was there when it was finally over. Now, I want to sit with this case for a minute, because there's something underneath the story, something genuinely uncanny about how this unfolded, that I don't want to skip past in the rush to the ending. Marcus and Troy went to that house to steal. They picked it because it looked abandoned, because no one had cared for it, because it had been sitting in the kind of quiet neglect that says asterisk, nobody's watching. And they were right. Nobody was watching. But Linda Marsh was still there. 7 years of silence, and that house still held the truth. Every detective who worked it, every tip that went nowhere, every dead-end interview, none of it cracked it open. 2 men with a crowbar and zero intention of doing anything good accidentally walked into the one place that had the answer. I've thought about this case a lot since I first read it, and here's what gets me. Detective Frank Okafor had said in that 2018 interview, years before any of this, that the case felt like it wanted to be solved, that there was something unfinished about it, that he couldn't explain why he still drove by Linda's house. He later said, when asked about the break-in that cracked it open, asterisk, I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I believe in overdue. Asterisk, that's going to live in my head for a long time. And here's the question I'll leave you with tonight, the one that has no clean answer. How many cold cases are still out there, sitting in houses nobody has thought to look inside of? How many files are gathering dust not because the evidence isn't there, but because the right set of eyes hasn't stumbled into the right room yet? Marcus and Troy did not set out to be heroes. They set out to steal a TV. But Linda Marsh got justice, and her daughter got an answer. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most uncanny thing about this world is that the universe finds a way to close the loop. Even when nobody's trying to close it. Even when it takes 7 years. Even when it takes a crowbar. That's this case. That's Uncanny Crime Stories. If you made it to the end of this one, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. And I mean that. If this episode hit different for you, share it. Send it to someone who needs to see it. The more people who watch, the more stories like this we can dig up and bring to light, and there are so many more. Hit subscribe if you haven't. There's a new case coming, upload schedule, e.g., every two days. And I promise you, the next one is going to make tonight look like a warm-up. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, the truth has a way of surfacing, even if it needs a little help getting there.